Booktube. Okay, today I'm reviewing The Scarecrow of Oz, which was originally published in 1915, but I have it here in the Complete Stories of Oz collection. So a few preliminaries before we get started. First of all, I'm doing this as a buddy reads with Dane Reads. I'll link to his channel in the description down below. At the moment I'm filming this video, he hasn't posted his review yet, so I haven't seen his review. But whenever he does post it, then I'll update the link in the description down below, so look out for that. Also, I am relying on some analysis from a review by Marie Ness at Tor.com. 10 years ago, Marie Ness, who I believe is an established author, did a reread through the whole Oz series and reviewed the books as she went on Tor.com. And I find her reviews both informative and insightful. And also Wikipedia, reading stuff on Wikipedia. So let's get into it then. Yes, The Scarecrow of Oz. So, speaking of Wikipedia and the background research I did therein, like a lot of these Oz stories, this one has a bit of an interesting behind-the-scenes story. So, in 1912, with the Emerald City of Oz, L. Frank Baum attempted to stop the Oz series. He had done 6 books. He thought that was enough. And he tried to start a new series called The Sea Fairies. The Sea Fairies was the first book, which introduced 2 new characters, a little girl named Trot and an old sailor named Captain Bill. It's like Captain Bill, but it's spelled with an apostrophe, so it's Captain Bill. And they go on adventures and discover magical lands under the sea or something like that. I'm relying on the Wikipedia summary here. The book did not sell as well as his Oz series, but he gave these characters one more try in a sequel book called Sky Island, in which he took Captain Bill and Trot, and then he paired them up with a couple of characters from the Oz series. Polychrome, the Rainbow's daughter, who had been in the Road to Oz, Road to Oz, I think, was book number 4 or 5. No. Yeah, Road to Oz, I think, was book number 5. And Button Bright, who was also from the Road to Oz. And so I think he was trying to boost the sales of his other series with some crossover appeal by using a couple of his Oz characters, but the series still didn't sell well. I think Sky Island sold even less well than its predecessor, if I'm remembering Wikipedia correctly. So then L. Frank Baum returned to the Oz series again after he went bankrupt and he really needed the money. And he returned to the Oz series with book number 7, which was, what was book number 7 again? The Patchwork Girl of Oz. And then he had book number 8, which was the TikTok of Oz. Now we're here in book number 9, The Scarecrow of Oz, published in 1915. And Scarecrow of Oz, L. Frank Baum decided that, I guess since he was not going to continue writing stories about Captain Bill and Trot anymore in their own series, he decided to just import them into the Oz series. So the Scarecrow of Oz starts off all about the adventures of Captain Bill and Trot. Which is a bit strange because it's called The Scarecrow of Oz, but actually, this has been a common theme throughout all these Oz stories, is that the title of the book usually does not very accurately reflect the focus of the story. That's been true of almost all of them. So here's another one in that list. The Scarecrow does appear, but he doesn't appear until near the end. Right. So Captain Bill and Trot, they start off on the ocean. They decide to go for their daily ride in the ocean or something like that, and then they get sucked into a whirlpool and taken to a mysterious cavern under the sea. Where they're trapped in this undersea cave, and then this strange bird called an orc ends up trapped in the cave with them, and then they go on a long journey to try and get out of the cave. So thus far, it's pretty much the same as most other Oz stories, meaning there are characters who get transported into a magical land, and they walk around, and as they walk around, they encounter strange stuff. That's the standard format for all of the Oz stories thus far, I believe. Almost. So after encountering some strange stuff, they end up in the land of Mo. Now, the land of Mo actually comes from another one of L. Frank Baum's series. The Magical Monarch of Mo was one of his first books before he launched the Oz series. And he's done a couple crossovers with the Kingdom of Mo so far. I believe, if I'm remembering right, some of the characters from the Magical Monarch of Mo showed up in the Road to Oz. He had like this big crossover event at the end of the Road to Oz where everybody showed up for Ozma's birthday. And then the Wise Donkey, who was a character from the Magical Monarch of Mo, showed up in the Patchwork Girl of Oz. So here's yet another crossover with the Magical Monarch of Mo, where Captain Bill and Trot are in the Magical Monarch of Mo Kingdom, and then they run into Button Bright. And they know Button Bright, of course, because he went on adventures with them in Sky Island. By the way, this is probably as good as time as any to make clear that I actually never read Sea Fairies or Sky Island, or the Magical Monarch of Mo, for that matter. I'm relying on the Wikipedia summaries for them. I wanted to read them. I thought it was unfortunate that they weren't included in this edition. Although, let's face it, this edition is a pretty big already. I don't know how much more stories it could handle in one binding, but it's a reminder that the complete Stories of Oz is not necessarily complete. It's all the canonical stories, but it doesn't include L. Frank Baum's other fairy tale stories, which he crosses over. So I knew from Wikipedia that after trying to end the Oz series, L. Frank Baum went off and tried to launch another series, and then he brought those characters back into the Oz story in this one, the Scarecrow of Oz. It's on Project Gutenberg. All of this is on Project Gutenberg, and I toyed around with the idea of reading it off Project Gutenberg. I think I read like the first couple paragraphs of the Sea Fairies off of Project Gutenberg, but I didn't want to read a whole book off of my computer screen. Especially during this COVID lockdown time. I'm doing all my work on the computer, as everybody is, right? The Zoom meetings and the working from home and all the stuff that goes with that. So I don't have a Kindle. Apparently those are easier on the eyes, but I decided against reading those stories off of the computer screen, even though they look, based on the Wikipedia summary, they look like they might be interesting stories. And I felt like I should read those stories so that I knew what Captain Bill and Trot's backstory was before going into the Scarecrow of Oz, because the Scarecrow of Oz starts off with them as the main characters. At the same time, though, At the same time, a running theme throughout my reviews has been the very sloppy continuity that L. Frank Baum is keeping all throughout his Oz series. So stuff will be very clearly set up in one Oz book, and then completely disregarded in the next Oz book. I mean, there is a continuity of sorts in the way that each book adds more characters to the mix. And one, he loves reusing characters. So once characters are added in, then they keep popping up in future books. So his stable of magical characters in the Land of Oz is getting bigger and bigger with each book, and that is kind of fun to see. But in terms of internal consistency, he is terrible at this. So I thought to myself, well, especially how much I complained about the continuity errors in the previous book, the TikTok of Oz, I thought maybe it's just as well. Maybe it's just as well I'm reading the Wikipedia summary, because if I was actually to read those books myself, it would just give me more continuity errors to complain about. Speaking of which, apparently a continuity error, something that was mentioned by Marie Ness on her review, is that at the end of the book, spoilers, at the end of the book, The Scarecrow of Oz, Captain Bill and Trot are invited to stay in Oz. And they accept, they stay in Oz. Trot actually has a mother back in America, who was in the Sea Fairies in the Sky Island book, and that mother is just dropped now, so that Trot and Captain Bill can live in the Land of Oz, and I think that mother is just never mentioned again. So yeah, that's a kind of very fluid continuity, or lack of strict continuity, that L. Frank Baum maintains. To be fair, I think it was a different era. I think the internet culture and geekdom and obsession over continuity probably didn't exist in 1915, right? But anyways, where was I? They end up in the magical land of Mo, where they meet Button Bright, who they had previously encountered in Sky Island. And Button Bright, of course, is an Oz character from The Road to Oz. Marie Ness makes the observation that his Button Bright's characterization has changed slightly. So in The Road to Oz, he was liable to get upset and break into tears when things didn't go his way all the time, or when he got scared. He's been reimagined slightly now, and I guess this maybe started in Sky Island, but he's been reimagined as a kid who always gets lost, and who nothing phases him. Any sort of obstacle or any sort of danger, and he just completely matter-of-factly observes the situation. He's still a little bit dim-witted, which is from similar to The Road to Oz. He had a penchant for getting lost in The Road to Oz as well, although I think in The Road to Oz he only got lost at the beginning of the story. Now apparently his character trait is he gets lost multiple times throughout the story. So reimagined slightly, but character from The Road to Oz. So then they travel from Mo. They managed to get some birds to help them, and they fly across the deadly desert surrounding the Land of Oz. And they end up in the kingdom of Jinxland. Now, Jinxland has never been mentioned before, and as far as I can tell, I looked this up on the Oz Wiki. Doesn't pop up in any future books ever again, at least not of the canonical books. I think there are some non-canonical books that have deal with the characters from Jinxland, but as far as I can tell from Wikipedia and the Oz wiki, Jinxland does not pop up again. But it's a kingdom in the land of Oz, but it's cut off from the land of Oz by mountains and a deep gulf, a deep chasm, some sort of deep hole. Sorry, I'm blanking on the word that they use it in the story. What do they use in the story? They talk about mountains and surrounded by mountains and gulf or a chasm or something like that. And here, so here we come to yet another influence on this story. So apparently, according to Wikipedia and according to Marine Nest reviews, the rest of the plot comes from a movie, a silent film called something like His Majesty the Scarecrow of Oz, which was a silent film which was produced by L. Frank Baum and some of his funders, a silent film about the land of Oz. So, this is another interesting thing if you go to Wikipedia. Everyone, of course, knows about the 1939 Judy Garland MGM musical. But there were actually several Oz films before then that are completely forgotten nowadays, probably with good reason, I imagine, which had been produced earlier, including a number of silent films that were produced in the 1900s and 1910s, with L. Frank Baum producing some of them, or writing or directing or being involved with them. So L. Frank Baum had helped to produce or had produced a silent film called His Majesty the Scarecrow of Oz, and and apparently the film did not do well. The film, actually, I was looking this up. It's on YouTube. I think it's in the public domain now. One of those really old films. So you can find multiple copies on YouTube. It's 55 minutes long. I did not have the patience to sit through the whole thing. I barely had the patience to sit through 5 minutes of it. But you can just watch bits and pieces of it to get an idea if you're curious. Right, so a silent film, His Majesty the Scarecrow of Oz, and the plot from that film is now being borrowed for the plot for this book, which apparently is why there's another romantic element in this book. I say another because the previous book, TikTok of Oz, had some romance in them, although that romantic plot was really only barely a subplot. It was, private files and the Princess Ozga, but that was almost barely mentioned. L. Frank Baum apparently did not want to do romantic plots in his Oz books because he believed that little children did not react well to it. But in TikTok of Oz, TikTok of Oz was recycled from a stage play. And stage plays always have a romantic couple. And the Scarecrow of Oz, the latter part of it, like the last 2/3, once they get into the kingdom of Jinxland, is recycled from the silent film, and silent films always have romantic couples. So, right. So the romantic couple in this, it's very fairy tale-esque. There is a wicked king, and there's a princess, and the princess is in love with the gardener's boy. But she can't marry the gardener's boy because the wicked king is trying to marry her off to the rich man, and the rich man is Googly Goo. His name is Googly Goo. Googly Goo is paying a lot of money to the wicked king. So the wicked king is trying to force the princess to forget about the gardener's boy and marry Googly Goo. and then the Wicked Witch gets involved to help them out. Um, right. So it's very with that setup with the king and the princess and the Wicked Witch and everything like that. You can tell right away it's invoking fairy tales. I've got here's my copy of the Brothers Grimm, which I read last year from cover to cover. I'm familiar somewhat with the genre, and it's I obviously invoking this. L. Frank Baum, according to his bio on Wikipedia, was actively trying to imitate fairy tales with his books. Like he studied fairy tales, he had copies of Andrew Lang's fairy tales, and of course the Brothers Grimm. He actively was studying them and trying to analyze what made them successful and trying to reproduce that success. So it's obviously no coincidence. Now, nothing really about the Scarecrow of Oz makes much sense. It's got this fairy tale setting, but it's filled with it's filled with a bunch of magical creatures like the Wicked Witch and her other witches, and who seem to have unlimited magical powers, but for some reason act in a rather restrained way. And then the whole thing is being watched by Ozma of Oz back in the land of Oz. We find this out at the end, who's got, of course, the magic belt, and the Wizard of Oz, who has magical powers at this point in the franchise, at this point in the series. And Glinda the Good Witch knows everything that's happening because it's all being written down in her magic book. And at any point that they wanted to, any of these characters that are observing what is going on could have intervened. They don't. Instead, they send the Scarecrow over to help. So the Scarecrow, Glinda sends the Scarecrow. So here's where the Scarecrow enters the picture. He's got like a number of magical items which Glinda gives him, which he doesn't use until like the very end of the story. That like this magic powder. Yeah, so the whole story is filled with moments where you're like, well, why didn't you use that magical power earlier? You clearly had the ability to do this all along. Why didn't you use it earlier? It's also filled with just things coming out of nowhere. So, the Scarecrow is about to be burned at the stake. He's about to be burned on fire, and it looks like this is going to be the end of the Scarecrow. The cruel king is trying to burn him. And then all of a sudden, all these birds come in flying out of nowhere and rescue him. I mean, it was kind of set up earlier in the story because we did hear that the orc, that the strange bird, was going to fly back home and trying to find his family. But it still feels like it's coming out of nowhere, just right at the climactic moment. So, anytime there's something happening, the whole story is filled with I believe the term is pronounced Deus ex machina, just things coming out of nowhere to resolve the plots, and way too many magical creatures who magical beings who have magic that they don't use until the very end, and all this stuff that makes absolutely no sense. But you could say the same thing about most of the stories in the Brothers Grimm. So yeah. So what are you going to do, huh? You know, I I think at this point in the series, you just have to forgive. You just have to forgive it. The series, these odd stories do not make logical sense. So you can't approach it. You can't approach it from that standpoint of like, yeah, the way most nerds pore over fantasy stories nowadays, looking for inconsistencies. That's just not the way the Oz stories are written. And granted, they're also written for a very young audience. Um, but yeah, what the Oz stories are good at is evoking a imagery and evoking a kind of atmosphere. So when they arrive in the land of Jinxland, it's set up perfectly like this very picturesque fairy tale land. Actually, let me read some of that for you. So they're flying in with the bird, and they're seeing it. She saw bits of forest, verdure clothed hills. I don't know what verdure clothed hills means, but something beautiful. I'm assuming some sort of beautiful hills, fields of waving grain, fountains, rivers, and lakes, and throughout the scene were scattered groups of pretty houses and a few grand castles and palaces. Um, yeah. Over all this delightful landscape, which from Trot's high perch seemed like a magnificent painted picture, was a rosy glow such as we sometimes see in the west at sunset. In this case, however, it was not in the west only, but everywhere. Um, so it's just set up as this incredibly beautiful fairy tale land with picturesque houses, and then this big beautiful castle, which is the background for this little love story, which is going to play out between the gardener's boy and the princess. And the illustrations, there are no illustrations in this book, unfortunately, but it's all on Project Gutenberg. And the illustrations on Project Gutenberg, the original illustrations that accompanied this book, and which would still accompany this book if you get a proper version of it, are very charming. Very bright colors showing these different characters. So you know, with these Oz books, I think what you have to do is you're going for the colorful image, and you're going for the imagery of the lands, and you're not looking for things to make logical sense, because things don't obviously usually make logical sense. Yeah, what else is there in this book? It's interesting. Both Trot and Button Bright are very skeptical of this whole romantic subplot. You know, they're introduced to Pon, the gardener's boy, who is crying because he's not allowed to. The king is keeping him away from the princess, and they just don't see what the big deal is. Yeah. So Pon, the gardener's boy, is saying the princess fell in love with me, and Trot says, "Did she really?" asks the little girl. So the little girl doesn't quite trust that the princess really fell in love with him. And then Button Bright says, "I don't see why," remarked Button Bright, staring at the youth. So they're both looking at the gardener's boy, and they're saying, did the princess really fall in love with you? I don't see why. And then later, Trot is comforting the princess. And the princess says, I am unhappy because they will not let me love Pon, the gardener's boy." And Trot says, "Well, Never mind. Never mind. Pawn isn't any great shakes anyhow, seems to me, says Trot soothingly. There are lots of other people you can love. The theory is that L. Frank Baum was doing this to try to appease his young audience who would not be very interested in the love story. And he's doing the love story because he's importing this from the silent movie. But yeah, kind of interesting there. Then finally everyone, the Scarecrow comes over, he uses some magic on the witch, he resolves everything. Then they go back to the Land of Oz, and then the last 10 pages or so are meeting up with everyone in Oz again. So it's revealed that Ozma of Oz was watching this whole thing on her magic picture the whole time. Didn't intervene at any point, even though she could have with her magic belt. Once the characters get across the mountains, though, then the wizard who's watching it with Ozma creates magic tables and magic houses for them to eat and sleep at, where all their needs are provided. The wizard at this point in the story has like near omnipotent powers, although he's described as not being as powerful as Glinda the Good Witch. So everyone who does magic in these odd stories has way too much magic. It creates all sorts of plot problems. The Scarecrow falls off the waterfall, which I'm not sure what purpose that serves other than to extend the story by a few pages. Then they go back to the Emerald City where they meet everyone. Betsy from the previous book. The end of these books, all the old characters always come back. Yeah, and then Trot and Captain Bill are allowed to stay in the Land of Oz. And again, Trot apparently had a mother from the Sea Fairies in the Sky Island book, but that's forgotten about now. According to Wikipedia, and I think Marie Ness mentioned this in her review as well, maybe, this is actually the last time that the plot is going to revolve around an outsider coming to the Land of Oz and being allowed to stay. So the remainder of the books in this collection, the remainder of the books that L. Frank Baum worked on, are not going to use that plot. I don't know what the plot of the remaining books are going to be. It'll be interesting to see. But yeah, Wikipedia says that it was the last time L. Frank Baum used that. There are other people continued the Oz series after he died, so I don't know if it would pop up again in their books. Okay, I think maybe I'll just finish there. There's a few interesting things I didn't note, but I've talked through most of the plot and I've rambled on for over 30 minutes, so I'm going to stop here.